you all.
So why don't we just start by talking about the book. So what inspired you to write this? What are the story elements that came together for you first?
So one thing I like to talk about is that before I went back to graduate school I was a teacher or a lecturer for 6 years at various community colleges teaching introductory astronomy and astrobiology. And in the astrobiology course that I taught, we essentially studied everything from habitable worlds, interstellar travel, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and we really spent a lot of time going over what does it actually take for life to survive in the cosmos. And I repurposed quite a lot of the material that I shared with my students in the Scourge Between Stars. I kind of used it to set up the world from which the colonists are fleeing, and definitely used it to kind of set up some of the spooky elements of the story as well. So really the book is super inspired by the time that I spent as an educator. The original idea came to me all the way back when I was in high school, but I didn't get a chance to flesh it out until 2020 when I wrote it. So I think it's a combination of my youth really enjoying a lot of like sci-fi horror flicks and comics, etc. And then the really great experiences that I had teaching.
Is this going to be assigned reading in future classes?
Only for fun. Extra credit, maybe.
Extra credit. That is a thing that English teachers will do, so. Having survived that
I see.
Guaranteed income. So you just mentioned your youth, and I wanted to just kind of give a shout out to the dedication here. It says, to my parents who gave me their love for all things strange, spooky, and speculative. And I have kind of two questions about that. But first, what are some of the like spooky, speculative stuff that you did read growing up that maybe informed what you wrote here?
I think one thing that everyone picks up on right away is the really deep connection that the story has to Alien, which is an incredible sci-fi horror classic. But I also was super inspired by movies like Contact as well, which is certainly related to some of the reasons why I became an astrophysicist in the first place. It's also inspired by video games that I enjoy, so like Deep Space. That's a fantastic game where you're essentially fighting super scary alien things in very tight spaceship corridors. And even Doom, for example, or Pitch Black as well. These are the kind of films and media that I was really into growing up, and that you can certainly kind of see flavors of in the Scourge Between Stars.
For sure. Yeah, Alien is of course like the first thing that I thought of. I mean, it's aliens on a spaceship. It's going to be possible to escape that. So the second half of this question that I had about this dedication is, so there's a really kind of tragic family story that's grounded at the heart of this book. And I wanted to ask why you decided to ground all of these elements together, like the science fiction, the spacefaring, the horror element, and then just have it all tied together with this sort of intergenerational struggle between a child and her parent.
I think for me, one thing that I really focused on while writing this book was incorporating as many versions of horror, I guess, as I could. So we have the cosmic horror element with the spaceship traveling through very dangerous void. And then we have a lot of impersonal horrors, like what's going on between shipmates, what we see happening with the agency or lack thereof of the robotic entities on ship. And then, just the kind of generic horrors that we experience in our home with our family members sometimes. I just wanted to play, with those elements. In the short space of a novella, there's not a lot of time to go deep into any one of them, but I definitely wanted to show Jacqueline fighting not only, Jacqueline, our acting captain of the starship, not only fighting these, really intense, high stakes, urgent battles on ship, but also, the kind of battles that we may be more familiar with in our day-to-day life.
So just jumping off of that, so there's a lot of science fiction that's written. I think a lot of it, when we think especially about golden age science fiction, that is about humanity like colonizing other star systems, other planets, and just sort of pushing this narrative of like humanistic expansion into the solar system. And this book kind of starts with saying that failed. Like all of the like good intentions and optimism did not actually stand up to being on another planet that we don't belong to. So how do you see this book in like conversation with those kinds of stories? Because it did feel a little bit like a direct like, what do you think? I have degrees in this.
Yeah, I having studied interstellar travel in some depth and having thought about it, and certainly having explored the idea of habitability beyond Earth, I do have very strong feelings about the idea that human expansion throughout the galaxy is inevitable, or even that it is over the horizon. If I could give a professional opinion, those just aren't true. And I definitely wanted to write a story where, we were dealing with that, and with the fallout of that. When I was teaching my course on astrobiology, I had an entire lecture set aside for climate change here on Earth and what human activity is doing to our planet. And I really like to give this lecture kind of after several weeks of explaining, here are all the things about Earth that make it so that the last 4 billion years of this planet have been lush and productive, and we see the great kind of bounty that we see on the world today. And then kind of showing my students comparisons to other worlds in the solar system, other worlds that we know of elsewhere in the galaxy, and letting them kind of deal with the extreme dichotomy. Right now, Earth is the only place that we know of with these conditions. And this sort of manifest destiny-esque mindset that we have about expanding outward, I think it's arrogant. And I also think it doesn't do us or any of these other worlds we're considering any favors. So that was really a big motivation in kind of starting the story out on that note of failure.
Yeah. You did mention the artificial intelligence that is in the story, Watson, which as a Jeopardy nerd, sorry that like my first reference for Watson is Jeopardy and not Sherlock Holmes. Who I am as a person. But yeah, and I didn't actually come up with like a good question. I just wanted to talk about Watson. So would you mind explaining like who Watson is, like what they do in the story? I actually forget how you pronounce it.
Watson?
Yeah.
Prefers him.
Thank you.
And that's a very deliberate choice. So in the book, we have our main character, acting Captain Jacqueline Albright of the starship Calypso, and she is accompanied for essentially all of the story by an android named Watson, who is created by the head of the data division of the ship. And although Watson is an incredibly powerful computer, they are kind of misused on ship and not really allowed to function to their the droid's full potential. And essentially, Watson is a favorite character of mine in this story because we have a droid who, as our main character, is struggling to find her place on board and struggling to reconcile herself with the duties that she has to now take on in a crisis. We have our droid Watson, who is kind of figuring out how to be a person without necessarily falling in line with, societal ideas of like what kind of person, it should be. So I really like Watson in that, the droid is kind of figuring out a way to take hold of its own agency. And I think that anybody, obviously human, droid, whatever, can kind of relate to that.
Yeah, there's a really interesting, there's a lot of really interesting power dynamics. First off, with Jacqueline, the captain, who has been sort of forced into this position of acting as the captain because her father has been treated. And then also, navigating the many, many needs of all the other lords in the ship. It's a logistical nightmare, even before the aliens start killing people. How much, were you thinking about, I guess just, you have like this background in astrophysics, and you've already kind of talked about like the sort of unlikeliness of humanity actually expanding outwards. How much were you thinking also about the complications of just like the people that would need to be staffing a generation show?
Mm-hmm. I did a lot of math while I was writing this story. I did math about like the interstellar journey itself. I was doing math with like cruise ships, for example, trying to figure out like actual capacities and what could be realistic for a fleet of starships. And actually it was looking at cruise ship hierarchies and like their kind of employee charts that I realized that you really do need a web of people to make any large vessel function. So, you know, as best as I could, I wanted to kind of incorporate, or at least demonstrate that there are a lot of roles on the ship, there are a lot of duties on the ship, and when people kind of don't all come together to fulfill those duties, then, you know, shit starts hitting the fan. And obviously this is taking place on a spaceship, which is a scenario that most of us are never going to experience. But I think that, you know, just in general, the idea of cooperation, the necessity of cooperation, I think that that has a pretty broad applicability. So just something that I was thinking in the back of my head while designing the starship itself.
Yeah. I also see Jacqueline as being sort of very different from, you know, the idea of like a spaceship captain, who I always think of like Captain Kirk, right? Like this is like an action hero who can do everything and is sort of like cold and like never thinks twice about putting himself in danger. And that's not Jacqueline. Jacqueline is very aware the entire time that she's out of her depth. Not even just because, like I said before, she's kind of been put into space. But also she was being asked to do things that aren't in the realm of her duty. What was your process with coming up with Jacqueline and like her sort of character arc?
I think with Jacqueline, I mean, my main priority was having Black queer representation in the sci-fi horror space. That was like kind of the first thing that was on my mind. But I wanted to kind of have Jacqueline be specifically a Black woman captain because I feel that a lot of the things that she deals with kind of just resonate with certainly Black women, but maybe other readers as well, who are kind of doing the same thing in other spaces, where Jacqueline has no desire for glory, or even necessarily power, but she has to do incredible amounts of work that's not her own, just to keep the ship from sinking, so to speak. So that should be very familiar. So lots of different, you know, demographics, I think. So yeah, those are sort of the things that I wanted to bring out of Jacqueline as a main character.
Okay, one last question is about genre stuff. So science fiction and horror, like, I always think that they go really well together. But it also sort of feels like kind of like underrated genre. Like sci-fi people don't always feel comfortable with horror, and horror people are like, why is there a spaceship in this? I don't understand. And nobody, of course, wants to deal with ship mutinies or like aliens. So how did you find a balance between those two genres, like keeping it firmly grounded in both?
I would say it's what I know. My parents, like I said, I credit them as huge inspirations for the existence of this book at all, but definitely a lot of the things that I kind of saw growing up kind of already had sci-fi and horror hand in hand. So things like signs. I mentioned Pitch Black earlier. I think, what is it, The Time Machine? That's not space horror, but it's like
Sci-fi horror.
Yeah, it's like a sci-fi horror.
Technological horror?
Techno horror. So for me, they've always been very linked, and I didn't feel that it was a huge reach at all to kind of bring the genres together. You know, I think maybe other people who don't have the background, or you know, these aren't the genres that they usually flock to, maybe it can seem like a you know, out there mashup. But for me, I think that sci-fi and horror, if I can be corny.
Always.
I mean, I feel that sci-fi as a genre is close to horror in that we're kind of envisioning what is beyond the now and what is beyond current human comprehension. And I feel horror is asking all the time, like, what is beyond, what is beyond our comprehension? Maybe that's in like a supernatural way. The question is framed supernaturally for some horror pieces. But I think the questions that horror and sci-fi ask, I think, are very related. So they seem quite natural to pair them together for me.
Do you have a favorite scene in the book that you want to either read or like tell people about? I'm sorry, like big shift, big pivot.
This is a good question. I don't think I can read it because it's long and it's, kind of the height of the story, but I would say that my favorite scene is in the middle of the hunt for the on-ship intruder that we find out about kind of towards the middle of the book, where Jacqueline and a team are attempting to find out what entity has been slaughtering crew members on board. And the reason why this is my favorite scene is because I think it incorporates so many of the things that I really liked about the objectively bad sci-fi horror movies that I really liked growing up. So like first-person shooter scenes in Doom. If anybody remembers that, very.
I'm looking at my wife who's playing video games more than I have.
I already mentioned previously, like Dead Space. I feel that the scenes where Jacqueline is working with kind of the only tools that she has left to go up against this unknown force. I really like the moment where we're like in the chase proper, blood is pumping and maybe laser shots are flying. That's my favorite. That was my favorite part to write. Definitely.
So a new mission to the moon, or around the moon, was just announced. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. But would you personally accept an invitation to go into space after writing this and inheriting all of the space horror?
No. I will
Say
never
more.
leave
I feel like you did just write an entire thesis about this is
why we should.
But have fun.
Yeah, for everyone else. I mean, to clarify, I would never go on an interstellar journey. I would never do that. Too much potential for wrong. That is absolutely the thesis here. I could consider a trip to the moon because that's like 3 days, one way. Not bad. I'm back in a week. It's okay. But otherwise, it's not for me.
I feel like I've read too many stories about all the things that went wrong just on a trip to the moon, and so I'm just I'm good. I'm fine. I'll just stay right here. Okay. Do you want to talk about what you're working on next? If you're working on something next.
Sure. I'll talk about the next space horror that I'm working on.
Space horror. We need more. People keep going up there.
Why do they do that? So this Scourge Between Stars was kind of all confined to a spaceship, a derelict spaceship on the verge of collapse. And that setting kind of came with its own myriad of scares and horrors. But the next sci-fi horror that I'm working on kind of shows what horrific things lie after you actually touch down planet side. So in this next story, we're basically dealing with a team of galactic researchers who are sent to investigate a missing signal on a colonized exoplanet. And the native flora on that planet are not quite receptive to each other.
I'm sure that's understating.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Can I ask about your cat names? They're in your bio.
That's true.
Okay, and I think I warned you that I was going to ask about them. So you all heard the bio already, but yeah, you live with your husband and 2 cats, Faust and Mephi.
Yes.
Short for Mephistopheles. How's that going?
So as my family can attest, these 2 cats absolutely live up to their names. One is a demon, and the other is her not quite good sister. Sometimes gets pulled into the shenanigans. But yeah, actually, when I was an undergrad, I was assigned Faust to read, probably like many people. And my roommate and we had decided that later on in life we would open up a book cafe called Faust House. So we both really enjoyed reading the book. Unfortunately, that's
Here we
not,
are.
yeah. Slight diversion. But when I had the opportunity to pick up some cats and keep them at home, I immediately thought of Faust. I was like, who must come with Faust? And
Well,
we all know, contractually speaking. But yeah, that's them.
I'm glad you haven't regretted your decision. Give you the names. But yeah, cats do live up to the names that you give them, just like children. Okay. So, should we do questions from the audience? Did you want to do a reading at all from the book?
Sure, I could do a quick reading.
Yeah, let's do a reading and then we can. So while they're reading, you all can think of questions, right? Right. You're talking to 2 teachers who are like, who has questions? Not like does anyone. You will have questions.
Great. Okay. So we're trying to find something not too long. But I do like this scene here. I am not a reader, so I do the writing, not the reading, so please pardon me, but a noise ripped Jacqueline from her musings. She froze where she leaned against the pressure glass, holding her breath to listen. The deck was utterly silent, completely dark without reserve lighting since the motion detectors had forgotten her. She thought for a second that she had imagined the sound until it came again. She recognized it immediately, a bang in the bulkhead. Victoria hadn't sent any update on yesterday's mysterious noises beyond mentioning that the doll still hadn't reported back. Jacqueline tried to remember if the pipes from the labs ran this way, if whatever had been rattling around below had been forced upward by ventilation currents or the ship's heat transfer system. She stepped forward to investigate. Right away, the hairs on her arms stood up. Even though she had moved from the window, the reserve lighting didn't turn on. She sat here in the dark often, but moving through the shadowy deck was a different matter. She felt her way around the stargazing benches and came to a stop before the closest bulkhead. The silent, unlit deck was eerie enough that Jacqueline felt a little nervous and foolish for it. She reached a hand out to the wall, shaking off the goosebumps trying to rise under her uniform. As soon as her fingers touched the metal panel, a bang like a gunshot cracked under her touch, making her spring back. It came again, even louder. This time it was accompanied by a harsh, metallic scraping. She stared at the horrible noise, like nails scoring the wall from the inside. Pressure burst metal, grinding shrilly against the interior structure. Jettisoned debris, accidentally piped through the wrong system. Jacqueline cycled through possible explanations even as she shuddered, more and more unnerved with each deafening bang. Something seized her arm. A burst of adrenaline had Jacqueline lashing out instinctually. Her fist glanced off of metal. She hissed, snatching it back to cradle her knuckles. Jack. Watson released its tight grip on her. Jacqueline's unease curled into anger at the sight of the droid. She stuck a smarting finger in the droid's face. I told you. She forgot the rest when she noticed its eyes were shining the wrong color. Watson? She asked slowly. The sickly yellow glow in Watson's face cast a jaundiced light between them, making the droid look blond and sick. It had the same uncomfortable expression from before. The distress pulling at that familiar face made Jacqueline's heart skip a painful beat. They're opening the door. Watson whispered.
All right, you have time to think about it. What questions do you have?
Are there any cool guns?
There are cool guns, and when the cool guns fail, an even cooler thing is repurposed as a weapon.
This is a nice, like, spoiler-free way to put that, because, yes, very true. Cosign. One of the questions you guys have is really cool gun on the cover, too.
What other like fictional authors do you look for in like the sci-fi or horror realm?
So if you guys have not read already, S.A. Barnes' Dead Silence, that is, I think it's described as like a haunted Titanic in space, where essentially this kind of salvage crew is sent to investigate the sudden reappearance of a kind of luxury cruise spaceship that went missing decades ago. And of course, when they step on board, everything goes wrong. So S.A. Barnes, that's a great talent, and she's also coming out with some new space horror as well. And I also have really enjoyed Caitlin Starling, particularly her book, The Luminous Dead, which is about, it takes place on an exoplanet, but you spend the whole time underground with a caver for hire, who signed on to a pretty questionable, is it spelunking?
Yeah.
Spelunking mission from a very mysterious kind of employer.
Caitlin also has a new book that's coming out soon.
That's right.
Yeah, called The
Basement.
Last leave the room.
Last to Leave the Room.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Yeah. Also sci-fi horror. Involves clones or doppelgangers, I'm not sure which. But creepy for sure. You can come in. It's fine. You can come in. Alright.
My question is really basic. Not a scientist. But what was sort of your process in coming up with the names of your characters? They named after.
Not named after people that I know.
Could they be?
I'll go out making very specific friends.
Are you named Jacqueline?
Too bad. I guess when it came to the character creation for this book, I wanted to really just incorporate as many different people from different backgrounds as I could, because we have the last of humanity kind of shoved into these repurposed starships. And I figured, it would probably be a jumble of different folks from all different kind of heritages and cultures. So really I was just focused on trying to incorporate as many different names from as many different cultures as seemed feasible.
Any surprise twists from any surprises in how you developed the character and like what you started with to how they developed into?
That is a good question.
I would say Watson, the droid. The story really involves Watson coming into its own and like discovering its own personhood, and that kind of meant that things would sort of happen along the way. Watson would make decisions, and I'd be like, oh, okay. So I would say Watson was kind of the surprise.
Is there another question? So you're a scientist. Obviously, you pulled from actual knowledge of actual science in this book. Were there any particularly interesting spots where you ran into like a place where science does not yet exist, or no, like you have to like make up stuff to fill, or like extrapolate to fill the blanks? And second part of the question, how do you handle the balance between giving your readers, who might not be scientists, just enough science to understand what's happening without going over to jargon?
Excellent question.
For your first question, I would say the big difficulty was describing the intruders on board. We have currently no kind of reference point for anything other than ourselves, anything other than what we know of life here on Earth. So when kind of considering an enemy that was like very different, I really had to jump off of what at least I knew, for example, about the Proxima b, which is the exoplanet that the colonists are fleeing from. That's a real exoplanet. It's actually the very closest one to Earth. So if we were ever to try to, jump ship and get off Earth and run away real fast, that's the closest option. But as the book briefly describes, Proxima b is probably not as warm and nurturing a home as the Earth. It's around a star that is very temperamental. It has these magnetic storms that basically lash the planet with loads of radiation. One side of the planet is in perpetual day, the other side is in perpetual night. So these kind of facts that we have kind of already pulled from the data about the exoplanet, that's what I used to try to construct what we see on the page. But of course, it's all conjecture. It could be completely wrong. And I think that's the exciting thing about writing a sci-fi story. I'm so sorry. I don't remember the second question.
Oh, the second half of the question was about walking the fine line between science jargon and giving your readers who might not be scientists enough to understand what's happening.
Gotcha. I was recently asked, what do I think does work or doesn't work in, like sci-fi stories? And for me, I'm an incredibly open-minded reader myself. I'll take a look at any sort of premise as long as I'm not taken out of that suspension of disbelief. So at least my goal as a writer was to establish enough, hopefully answer enough of readers' automatic questions so that those are answered on page and then we can move forward with the action. So if it's, how is the spaceship being propelled? It's right here. Or, how, what are the reasons why we couldn't have survived on this exoplanet? Like, I try to provide those answers, hopefully as simply and quickly as I can, so that readers are never broken out of that and they can kind of keep it moving. Hopefully I succeed in most scenarios, but that's really the metric that I use.
There is definitely, not just in sci-fi, but like in all genres where you see an author is really excited about the research that they did. So there's a solid 3 pages about like Neolithic plants or something like that, or plants in Neolithic era.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to write it?
So this was a very special case. I'll just give like a super quick backstory, which is that in 2020, my publisher, Tor Nightfire, had an open submission period where for Black, Indigenous people of color, if you did not have an agent, you didn't have representation, you could just go ahead and submit your manuscript for consideration. And I was so excited because, I did not have representation. I was like, this is an excellent opportunity. I have to do this. I don't have a book. So there were about 3 weeks between when I saw the post and when I saw the deadline. And I asked my husband, I was like, do you think I can write a book in 3 weeks? And he said, go for it.
Well done.
Yeah, right. That's for it. But yeah, I went to bed at like 2 a.m. every day for a month, for that month. And we made it though, so I would never do that again. But for this particular story, it was a really rushed, intense writing experience that thankfully came up.
So you beat NaNoWriMo and then some.
If there's any other writers in here, we're all just like, wow, that's nice. Great.
It was like very clean too. Like you didn't need huge edits.
It's like the opposite of dragging somebody, because that's just what happens.
And it was so good. Oh, yeah.
You all did so good with the question and the answer portion.
Thank you.
Okay, teacher.
Listen, that's my wife. She can brag. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And also thank you, Astoria Bookshop. I believe of your copy of *Scourge Between Stars*. I mean, there's some here. There's copies over by the register, and I think you probably have other announcements. right?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say what you just said, that we've got
I couldn't
copies
see
of
behind that,
Ness's
but I'm-
creeping out. Yes, we've got copies of Ness's book over at the register. We've also got a few copies of Nino's books. And thank you to both of you for a really lovely evening. Thank you to everyone who joined us.
I actually left my copy of this book